In the north, the Arabian slave trade, a relentless 13th century campaign that claimed as many as 18 million souls. For the 7th century onward, tribal warriors were swept into a vortex of desert caverns and salt mines, where survival was measured in days. Then the tide turned. From the west, the transatlantic slave trade war unleashed a new kind of terror. 12 million people, fathers, mothers, children, shackled in the dark holes of the Middle Passage, bound for a new world they never asked for. They were stripped of their names, they were robbed of their tribes, but they were not erased. Today, a new generation is fighting back, using the power of modern DNA and ancestral memory. The descendants of the northern and the southern tribe of Yashar-Al are piercing together a broken history. The war for their bodies, centuries till now, the war for their identity has only just begun. Where are they? All right, Shalawam, Mashpacha. I cannot see anyone, but I'm gonna go ahead and continue on in the study. And so today we're going to be talking about something quite different. All right, today we're going to be talking about something quite different. So let me go ahead and drop this down. Alright. So I just want to thank y'all for coming today. I'm going to thank everybody that will listen to this message hereafter. So I'm going to begin. I'm going to go ahead and begin. So here I go. The systematic suppression of historical truth begins long before the modern era. The scribes of Yashar-Al, Yashar-Al meaning prince with the power of the Most High, were originally locked into a fierce cultural defense war against the Greek Seleucid Empire during the 2nd century BC. The Greek tyrant Antiochus Epiphanes launched a massive campaign of forced assimilation, banning the Hebrew language, criminalizing the keeping of the Sabbath, and threatening any citizen who observed the ancestral laws with immediate execution. And in direct defiance, the scribes of Yasharal went into hiding to record the real-time history of the Maccabean Revolt. The scribes documented how Judah Maccabee, Judah the Hammer, organized highly disciplined guerrilla warfare units in the rugged hills, successfully ambushing and annihilating the heavily armored Greek legions. Crucially, the scribes preserved an exact diagnosis of the empire's psychological warfare tactics in 1 Maccabees 3 and verse 48, noting that when the Greeks' force captured the sacred assemblies, they laid open the books of the law wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. It was the earliest documented instance of state-sanctioned whitewashing. When the Roman Empire later consolidated its grip on the Mediterranean and established the official state, sanctioned biblical canon, the books compiled by the scribes of Yashar-Al were deemed a direct threat to the imperial security. A text detailed a successful armored underclass revolt against against European superpower was dangerous fuel for an empire built on the backs of millions of enslaved people. To neutralize the text, Rome legally reclassified the books of the Maccabees as Apocrypha, a term derived from the Greek apokos, meaning hidden or concealed away. The ruling authorities legally removed these books from the main scriptures and locked the remaining texts behind the Latin language, the Vulgate. Because the lower classes and enslaved populations could not read Latin, the true revolutionary history was completely hidden from the masses. The state replaced a blueprint of armed resistance with a state-approved theology of passive submission. This imperial anxiety was identical to the panic that occurred just 2 years before the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 AD. In 60 AD, as the Roman 10th Legion marched down to the Jordan Valley, destroying everything in its path, the Essenes elders at Qumran realized a total cultural cleansing was imminent, and a desperate, most sacred text, including the prophetic Mashpacha scroll fragments 4Q285, into clay jars and buried them deep inside of the dark crevices of the limestone cliffs. The Messiah scroll implicitly prophesied that the prince of the congregation would rise to physically execute the leaders of the Kittim, the Roman Empire. The elders buried the scrolls right before the Roman fire hit the temple, gambling that the earth would preserve the unedited truth until the generations woke up from the illusion of the state. Centuries later, on the Atlantic edge, the west of West Africa, along the lagoons of what choreographers once designated the Slave Coast, lay the ancient coastal city of Uda. To the 18th century European superpowers, this sovereign territory was known by a singular targeted name, the Kingdom of Judah, also recorded as Wida, Yuda, Auda. Historical maps from the early 17th century, drafted by elite French and British choreographers like Guillaume Delisle, explicitly cataloged the specific settlements not as a primary outpost, but a wealthy, heavily populated sovereign kingdom, recognized the tactical and economic weight of the region. European empires, including the British, French, Portuguese, Dutch, constructed heavily fortified stones trading compounds directly on the beaches of the kingdom. Modern historical textbooks and popular media frequently employ a subtle method of revisionism when depicting this area, by focusing exclusively on the white governors, corporate logbooks, and naval captains stationed inside these coastal forts. The standard narrative reframes Ouida as if it were a white established European colony from its inception. The primary historical data paints a radically different reality. The white traders living within the walls of the British and French compounds were completely subservient to the sovereignty of black monarch. The European agents were legally bound to pay heavy port taxes, bow to the Judean king's judicial authority, and were strictly forbidden from moving even a mile inland without explicit royal permission from the palace. When the neighboring inland kingdom of Dahomey launched a lightning invasion and conquered Ouida in 1727, the sovereign Judean forces overran the coastal compounds, taking 40 English, French, and Dutch fort administrators prisoner. The systematic attempt to visually and historically whitewash Ouida served a precise geopolitical function. It removes the reality of black coastal sovereignty from the historical records by replacing a distinct, highly organized black kingdom with images of generic European maritime dominance. The modern educational system cuts the lineage of the survivors. It ensures that the millions of descendants forced through the gate of no return are taught to believe their history began in chains on a slave ship rather than inside of a mapped sovereign kingdom bearing the name of Judah. When the children were torn away, the oral history passed down by West African elders who lived in West Africa to little children, such as an 11-year-old Olaudah Aquino, before his kidnapping, remained the ultimate weapon against the total erasure of their Hebrew identity. The historical record demonstrates that the Maccabees, the whitewashing of the kingdom of Judah, the dismantling of the black veterans in 1919, and the history books are not isolated historical incidents. They are the execution of a continuous, unbroken chain of legal decrees designed to protect state violence and script the lineage of Yasharal of its sovereignty. The following timeline traces the exact administrative codes, dates, and authors, and the global and legal architecture in the perfect chronological order. So here I'm going to read to you June 18, 1452. Decree. Pope Nicholas. Name of the decree. Doom the verses. Papal bull. The legal mechanism, the supreme papal edict grants the King of Portugal the explicit divine sanctioned authority to invade, conquer, and capture all the Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ. Along the west coast of Africa, the decree officially commands the military to seize their lands, plunder their wealth and residue, their purses to perpetual slavery, establishing a foundational legal framework for the transatlantic slave trade. January 18, 1455 AD. Decree. That means just like if I say 2026 AD. We're not in BC, we're in AD now. January 8, 1455 AD. This is before the 1600s and the 15. Pope Nicholas. Name of the decree, Romanus Pontificus. Papal bull. The legal mechanism, a direct follow-up to the 1452 edict. The decree granted the Portuguese crown on the absolute monopoly over all Judean trade and navigation. It legally designated the capture and enslavement of the populations along the African coast, which directly affected the kingdom of Judah as a righteous civilization mission, stripping the native kingdoms of all international legal sovereignty. But they were not natives of West Africa, as we saw, and we're going to prove it to you right here. March March the 31st, 1492. King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella I of Spain name of the decree. Those are the ones that wrote the decree. The Alhambra Decree, Edict of Expulsion, the legal mechanism this royal decree made it a capital crime punishable by immediate execution and property forfeiture to openly practice or teach Hebrew identity. Did it say African identity or West African identity or black identity? It said they began to teach, they began to force people who knew their identity not to teach their history or their identity or their customs, or teach Hebrew identity, customs, or laws anywhere. So that means that your parents, it was against the law for your parents to tell you that you was a Hebrew. It doesn't mean that being a Hebrew is a religion. It means that the King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain set a decree that made it almost impossible for you to know who you was. And this is the reason why a lot of us do not know who we is right now. All the way stems back to this decree. Okay? And during all those years, those decrees were not lifted. The legal mechanism this royal decree made it capital crime punishable by immediate execution and property forfeiture to openly practice or teach Hebrew identity, customs, or laws anywhere within the Spanish Empire. The decree was specifically weaponized to stop the oral transmission of Hebrew culture and identity, triggering the Spanish Inquisition and forcing tens of thousands of Israelites, not Africans, to flee into North and West Africa. So how can they be natives of North and West Africa if they were refugees, Israelite refugees living in Spain and Portugal? And if they're Israelite refugees, Judean to be exact, the kingdom of Judah to be exact, refugees that was living in Spain and Portugal, then how be it that they were actually from the land that we know now today as Canaan and Israel? To openly practice or teach Hebrew identity, customs, or laws anywhere within the Spanish Empire. The decree was specifically weaponized to stop the oral transmission of Hebrew culture, triggering the Spanish Inquisition and forcing tens of thousands of Israelites to flee into North and West Africa, where they blended with existing interior populations. So here they fled to North and West Africa to blend in with the natives of North and West Africa. They looked like the Egyptians. They looked like the Cushites. They looked like the Moabites. The ones that was to be enslaved looked like the Shemitic tribes. They looked like Yashar-Al. They looked like the Hamitic in skin complexion. And it says October the 4th, 1705. All right. So during all this time of 1492, this attack was going on with the kingdom of Judah. Then you jump down to 1705. We know in 1619 what was going on with the kingdom of Judah that was in that area. Being brought over on cargo ships, also in the 1700s as well. So October the 4th, 1705. What was this decree about? The General Assembly of the Colony of Virginia. Name of the decree, the Virginia Slave Act of 1705, the Black Codes. The legal mechanism, this comprehensive plantation decree systematically stripped the survivors of slave ships of their human status, legally classifying them as real estate property, so they didn't get free. Crucially, the decree, so when it say the 14th Amendment, you in the 14th Amendment, but as property, okay? Legally classifying them as real estate property. Crucially, the decree made it a felony for any Israelite individual, enslaved or free, that means freedman or bondman, to own a firearm, carry a weapon, or lift a hand in self-defense. And this is why a lot of us face troubles today when we try to defend ourselves from imminent danger. It's because this decree was given in 1705. And it's been a long tradition to keep this decree alive. Or lift a hand, codifying the state's monopoly on violence on Turtle Island. Turtle Island mean the whole continent of what they call now today America. February 22nd, 1819. Still during the time of slavery, and some people being snuck over here from the kingdom of Judah. Decreer King Ferdinand. Y'all heard of King Ferdinand of Spain? John Quincy Adams, U.S. Name of the decree: the Adams-Unis Treaty, the Transcontinental Treaty. The legal mechanism facing colonial collapse and revolution in Mexico. Spain signed a geopolitical trade that handed the entire Florida territory. So when you see here, it says Spain. And if Florida, if the Spanish set their flag down in Florida, and when you look up here, 1492, King Ferdinand, and the files is underneath the video. All you got to do is look at them, and if you want to see the books, I left those underneath there too. So when you look at February 2, this is Florida now, and remember Georgia and Florida, and Alabama, and even Texas was once the colony of Spain. And remember, Isabella and them was over Spain, all right? And because of that marriage, they had a joint union of Spain and Portugal, all right? And see, this is why we need to understand what marriage is all about. Because marriage is not just what we make it to be. Marriage is also what kingdoms do. And whether we want to receive it or not, we are understand that we are in perpetual servitude in the lands of our captivity, living in a delusional belief that we have been set free and liberated. How can you be liberated when you have not received any restoration? When you have not received any restoration, when you have not been redeemed, when your property has not been given back to you, don't worry about it. I got it recorded on another angle. Your property has not been given back to you. You have not been redeemed. Even your identity is held captive. Let me go over these decrees again because I believe that you missed them. June 18, 1452. Decreer, Pope Nicholas, where we get Santa Claus from. Name of the decree, Dum Diversis, Papal Bull. The legal mechanism, this supreme papal edict granted the King of Portugal the explicit divinely sanctioned authority to invade, conquer, and capture all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ. We're going to see who these enemies of Christ is that the Pope Nicholas was writing decrees against. All right, because inside of Spain, there was a group of people that was calling enemies. Let's go on in here. Sanction authority to invade. And if you want to follow along with me, I wrote all the information underneath the video, along with the books and everything you need to fact check everything that I'm saying to you. All right. And you can even fact check the scriptures to see if these things line up with the prophets. The explicit divinely sanctioned authority to invade, conquer, and capture all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ along the west coast of Africa. The decree officially commanded the military to seize their lands. So this is how they gained the ability to exile the Judeans down to west coast of Africa, because that was also a plantation of Spain. All right. Sanction authority to invade, conquer, and capture all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ. And they're going to tell you why they was calling them the enemies of Christ along the west coast of Africa. And the decree officially commanded the military to seize their lands, plunder their wealth, and reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, establishing the foundational legal framework for the transatlantic slave trade war. And you got to understand that this decree during the time of slavery was a standing law. It was a standing Roman Catholic Church law, a standard church law. January 8, 1455. Decreer Pope Nicholas, the same guy. Santa Claus. Pope. Name of the decree: Romanus Pontificus. Papal bull. The legal mechanism, a direct follow-up to the 1452 edict. This decree granted the Portuguese crown an absolute monopoly over all Judean trade. And we're going to show you why I know it's Judean people. And navigation. It is legally designated the capture and enslavement of the populations along the African, they say African enslavement of populations along the African coast, which directly included, which was directly the kingdom of Judah, because the fun was not out there knocking the fun head off. You got to understand the fun. When you read through history, you will see that the fun was fighting against the kingdom of Judah, that the other tribes around them was fighting against the kingdom of Judah, that the Ottoman Empire was fighting against the kingdom of Judah, not Judah fighting against their own self, not fun fighting against their own self. Not all the other tribes that they try to bunch all in together and say that they all was knocking each other side the head because they all slow and they monkeys and they climbing trees and eat bananas all day and sit up there and scratch and bite fleas out each other back and stuff, what they say about the people on the continent. That's not how they operated. They were people with minds, and they were not monkeys swinging in no tree. A direct follow-up to the 1452 edict. It was a follow-up to the 1452 edict. This decree granted the Portuguese crown an absolute monopoly over all the Judean trade and navigation. It legally designated the capture and enslavement of the population along the Judean enslavement of the population along the African coast, which directly affected the kingdom of Judah. Judah's righteous civilization mission, stripping the native kingdom of all international legal sovereignty. All the tribes in Africa was not stripped of their sovereignty, but it was the targeted tribe that was stripped of their sovereignty. That's why you still know who all the other tribes is, even though they given new names under this new administration, which is the iron and clay and not the iron. March the 31st, 1492. Here we go. This is a follow-up to these other laws. Remember, these are laws of the church that was going on during this time. March the 31st, 1492. Did it say in 1492 the Judeans that were under assault after all these 14 centuries, 70 AD centuries, did it say that they got redeemed and now they're no longer messing with them? No, it didn't say that. Watch this. March the 31st, 1492 AD. Just like you say 2026, you can say 2026 AD. Because it's not BC, it's not before Messiah. All right, March 31st, 1492, decreer. King Ferdinand, and Queen Isabella of Spain. Name of the decree, the Alhambra decree. This is another law. This is another law that was written, okay? Edict of expulsion. The legal mechanism this royal decree made it a capital crime punishable by immediate execution and property forfeiture to openly practice or teach Hebrew identity, customs, or laws anywhere within the Spanish Empire. The decree was specifically weaponized to stop the oral transmission of Hebrew culture, not African culture, but Hebrew culture, a specific group that was in Africa that need to retain the knowledge of their identity that this decreer, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, actually didn't want you to have. Triggered the Spanish Inquisition. This is what kicked off the Spanish Inquisition. Your identity. Your identity kicked off the Spanish Inquisition. So calling yourself an African when you don't own not one country in Africa is not, it doesn't add up, family. If I say I'm an African American, I am not a citizen of all the countries in Africa. And am I redeemed? Have we been redeemed in America? This is not a lot of our inheritance. We're not been redeemed in America. So how can we say that we are African or even American? We are descendants of Judeans who are in exile and in captivity. It says, triggering the Spanish Inquisition and forcing tens of thousands of Israelites to flee into North and West Africa, and the place was not even called Africa back then. Because those who were coming at us in their languages, some kind of way, they have a way to transliterate people's name. Some of the natives of the continent call it Al-Kibulan. Some natives of the continent call it whatever they want to call it. They don't even focus on all that. A lot of brothers and sisters over there, they say, I am a Ugandan. They don't say I'm a all the Ugandans that come over here don't say I'm a Ugandan. When you ask them who they is, if they're honest, they say, I'm a Ugandan American brother. They don't say I am an African, because if they born in Africa, what person in Africa you see in the continent that they call Africa, the colonizers call Africa, what person on the continent you see say that they are an African? What person on the continent call themselves Al-Kibulanian? What person throughout the history of the continent call themselves an Ophirian? If you are from the tribe of Alpar of Africa, then you are Ophirian. If you are from the tribe of Ephraim, then if you are from the tribe of Africans, then you are Apar Yam, which transliterates to Ephraim. But in their mistranslation, they translate it as Africans, and they add Ham, Shem, Japheth, and even themselves inside of Ephraim. Unwittingly, and some may do it wittingly. The legal mechanism, this royal decree, made it a capital crime. You know, a capital crime? Punishable by immediate execution and property forfeiture to openly practice or teach Abar identity, customs, or laws anywhere within the Spanish Empire. So if you was in Florida, you couldn't teach it. If you was in West Africa, you couldn't teach it. If you was in Spain, you know you couldn't teach it. If you was in any place that was, and since King Ferdinand and Isabella got married, that also strengthened the decree and made it against the law for you to practice it in the Portuguese plantations. So if they set up plantations in the islands, which they do have plantations that were set up in the islands on this side of the globe, it was against the law for you to practice and teach your identity. Do you understand? Wherever they took over, their law followed them. The legal mechanism, this royal decree, made it a capital crime, punishable by immediate execution. You know, the electric shovel we used to get, now you get the euthanasia, the immediate execution. And probably the axe was dull, or the sword was dull, or they hung you on the tree like they hung Messiah on the tree. And property forfeitures to openly practice or teach, and they burnt some people alive. Teach Abar identity, customs, and your ancestors thought it was so important to teach this during the Maccabean period, and even during the time when we get closer to our time zone. Look at what they did, or laws anywhere within the Spanish Empire. The decree was specifically weaponized to stop the oral transmission of Abar culture, triggering the Spanish Inquisition. That's what triggered it. That's what triggered it. It was your identity. That's why you look and you try to find your identity, because they made a law during time of slavery for you not to know your identity. And it's right there that you was the Judeans, that they didn't want you to know that you was a Judean, and they didn't want you to keep your laws. They didn't want you to keep your customs. They saw what happened when we had a civil war out there, and they was afraid to go in there and fight our ancestors. So they said it's better to let them take their own self out. They saw what happened when you was unified. But imagine if the northern and the southern kingdom was together, but that didn't happen, because before Judah got took down, they took down the northern tribe right away. To openly practice or teach Abar identity, customs, or laws, and they took the northern tribe before the northern tribe down. The northern tribe went to Africa before Messiah was even born, Mashpacha. So when you hear brothers and sisters in Africa say that we was here, my brother, before Messiah was born, oh, they ain't telling you no tale. The scriptures say that. The historical records say they was down there. The monuments that they left proves that they was down there. Or laws anywhere within the Spanish Empire. The Christians wanted to take over the world. The Cretans wanted to take over the world with their royal decrees. And who was in their way? The one they called the enemy of the church, which was the kingdom of Judah, who fought them in Rome, who fought them in their homeland when Rome was trying to take over their place and had Jerusalem as a stronghold family. So the enemies of Rome, what they call it, the enemies of the Roman Catholic religion, was the southern kingdom. And if the northern kingdom woke up, then who else is it? But who was they fighting? The decree was specifically weaponized to stop the oral transmission of Abar culture. It wasn't weaponized because of hate speech. It was weaponized to stop the Abar culture, triggering the Spanish Inquisition and forcing tens of thousands of Yashar-Al to flee into North and West Africa. That's why they was down there, not because they was natives to there, but because they were soldiers. Sometimes in war, you got to retreat. So they retreated, where they blended with the existing interior populations. And ain't it easier if some of your brothers and sisters from the northern tribe, or even if some Moabites is down there, or even some Edomites is down there, for you to blend in with them, or even to blend in with Canaan? Isn't it easier for you to blend in with Kawash, Ethiopians? The General Assembly, the Falasha, isn't it easy for you to blend in with them? Assembly, so of the colony of Virginia, name of the decree, the Virginia Slave Act of 1705. And this is the same group of people. The Black Codes, the Negro Codes. And that's why in Florida we was calling ourselves Negroes on our birth certificate, because Florida was once a Spanish colony. Isabella, Queen Isabella and them, did you know that the King of Spain sent Christopher Columbus them over here? The kings sent them over here. And he didn't land in North America, but he landed in the islands first. That's why you have Portuguese plantations that was down there in the islands. And the second trip down here, another person colonized Florida and named it La Florida. The legal mechanism, this comprehensive plantation decree, and they was both sent by the king, by the royal crown. Decree systematically script the survivors, so all these laws, wherever they was, followed them. The Judeans were under them as Abid. And it says it right there in plain history. The legal mechanism, this comprehensive plantation decree, systematically script the survivors of the slave ships of their human status, legally classifying them as a real estate property. Crucially, the decree made it a felony for black individuals, Negro individuals, Negro individuals in Latin, Neger, that's how the Pope used to call us, niggers. Individuals enslaved or free. That means freedmen or people locked up in jail, in prison. Freedmen or bowmen. To own a firearm, carry a weapon, or lift a hand in self-defense against a white person. This is why today many people have a tradition. They believe that you don't have the right to defend yourself. In self-defense against a white person, legally codifying the state's monopoly on violence in Turtle Island. And guess who the first enforcers that they gave to make sure that that order was carried out? So look, there was some Israelites that was fighting underneath the Spanish colony, and there was some Israelites that was fighting underneath the Britain colony. Britain took over the colonies after Spain. And after Spain, the United States took over the colonies. Do you understand? Codifying the state monopoly on violence on Turtle Island. So it was just transfer of plantation rulers. February the 22nd, 1819. Decreer, King Ferdinand of Spain, John Quincy Adams, U.S. Name of the decree, the Adam on this treaty, the Transcontinental Treaty, the legal mechanism facing colonial collapse and Revolution in Mexico. Spain signed a geopolitical trade that handed the entire Florida territory over to the United States. In doing so, Spain intentionally sacrificed and sold out the free black freedmen whom they had previously invited to build towns like Fort Mossy and I think Moss, and the treaty allowed American slaveholders to pour into Florida, dismantled the sovereign Afro-Indigenous community, and violently re-enslaved the population. What they was doing, check this out. The ones that they invited to come down there and fight were victims of the transatlantic slave trade, not the indigenous people. The indigenous people had to fight, I'm pretty sure they did, but they invited the freedmen, is who I'm talking about right now. The freedmen, the kingdom of Judah, to come down there and fight. This is why in Florida there was a tribe called the Seminoles, which means runaways. Why inside of artwork they showing Seminoles as European people? Wasn't no European people no runaway slaves. The treaty allowed America slaveholders to pour into Florida, dismantle the sovereign Afro-Indigenous communities, and violently re-enslave the population. So if Spain had them in slavery, if Spain was over the thing right here, right? Spain had the kingdom of Judah in slavery, right? Christopher Columbus and all them were given decrees and edicts protecting them to do this to the kingdom of Judah, whom they called the enemies of Christ. Look through history. There are many European historians from back then that said that the Judeans were the enemies of Christ, of Christendom. So in 1492 and in the 1500s and in the 1800s, who was these people that they had as prisoners of the Roman Catholic Church? You see it right here. It was the Seminoles. Look. Facing colonial collapse and a revolution in Mexico, Spain signed a geopolitical trade that handed the entire Florida territory over to the United States. In doing so, Spain intentionally sacrificed and sold out the freedmen whom they had previously invited to build towns like Fort Myer or Fort Moses. The treaty allowed America slaveholders to pour into Florida, dismantle the sovereign Afro-Indigenous communities, which is the Muskogee Creek and the rest of them, and violently re-enslave the population. May 28, 1830, decree. President Andrew Jackson, U.S. Congress, name of the decree, the Indian Removal Act. So now that you and the indigenous people were living together and mating, they had the remove of the Indian Act, right? The $5. You could pay $5. This is where everybody get their $5 from. The legal mechanism, the legislate decree authorized the forced military expulsion of all indigenous nations from their ancestral lands east of Mississippi River. All right, and those who were under them, who were under the indigenous people, were the freedmen. If they lived under the indigenous people, and they were adopted by the East Tribe in Mississippi, leading directly to the Trail of Tears. Now, who had the Trail of Tears? Is it the people that they show on Gunsmoke? In Florida, this law was weaponized to break the back of the highly successful Seminole, which means runaways, resistance. So if it was done to break the Seminole resistance, the runaway slaves resistance, then who was this person of this Indian Removal Act written to stop? Because you got to remember, the Muskogee and the Seminoles had joined together. Seminoles mean runaway slave, and the Muskogee is an indigenous tribe in Florida. So when you see the Seminoles, which is a Florida tribe, that origin is from Israel, as we seen through the 14, 19, and 1500 decrees, that's who they is. Resistance explicitly aiming to tear apart the armed military alliance between the indigenous chiefs and the black Seminole warriors led by Gopher John and John Horse. And Wildcat, Koa Kuchi. That means wildcat. Koa, Koako, Koko, Kuchi. Koko, that's how Koko, Coach. I'm not trying to be funny, but that's how you say wildcat. Koka Kuch. All right, I ain't gonna do it no more. In establishment common law, and I learned that from listening to Tariq Nasheed, and I had to look it up to see if it was true. In establishment common law, and that's why you have Lake Okeechobee. Different names the indigenous people name these places. Lake Okeechobee. In established common law since 1967. Decreer, the Supreme Court of the United States, name of the decree. Legal doctrine, qualified immunity. 1965, qualified immunity doctrine. The legal mechanism, a judicial manufactured doctrine that shields police officers and government agents from being held personally or financially liable for Now, what was going on in 1960s, family? Was it fair for the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade war that the decrees were written against? A judicial manufactured doctrine that shields police officers and government agents from being held personally, financially, and liable for violating a citizen's constitutional rights, including the use of excessive and deadly force unless the victim can prove the officer violated clearly established law. Where are they? We are. Until we meet again, take care of your spirit and keep moving with purpose. Shalawam, Mashpacha. Bahasham Yahabashah.